A long time ago, in a quiet land of hills and forests, there was a small village called Elderwood. It was not a place many people visited. The roads were made of dirt. The houses were built from stone and wood. Smoke rose gently from the chimneys each morning, and the air always smelled like bread, firewood, and fresh grass. The people of Elderwood were kind. They spoke softly, worked hard, and never hurried. But most of all, they listened. They listened to the birds. They listened to the wind in the trees. And they listened to the forest, a great dark forest that stood just beyond the village, tall and still. The forest had no name. People called it simply the woods. And even though no one feared it, they all respected it. There was an old path that led into the trees. It was not overgrown. It was not hidden. But no one walked it after sunset. Not because they were afraid, but because of the stories. Soft stories. Stories told near the fire, with tea and wool blankets. Stories about a light that moved through the woods at night. A single lantern, glowing golden. Some said it was a spirit. Others said it was a lost traveler. And a few believed it was the forest itself, taking the shape of something kind. But in every version of the story, the light never harmed anyone. It only watched. It only glowed. In Elderwood, there was one man who lived closest to the forest. He had no wife, no children. His cottage was small, with ivy on the roof and a crooked little fence. His name was Tom. People called him the Lantern Keeper. Though no one knew why. Tom was old, but strong. He had white hair and thick boots and a deep laugh that made birds stop singing. Every evening, before the sun disappeared, he lit the old lantern that hung by his door. It was always the same lantern. Its glass was dark and round, and its light was soft, not bright. After lighting it, Tom would walk to the edge of the trees and hang the lantern on an old post. Then he would sit on a log nearby and wait. No one knew what he was waiting for. Sometimes he whistled. Sometimes he said nothing. But always, when the moon was high, the lantern would go out by itself. And Tom would nod, stand up, and walk back home. Children liked to watch him from the road. He never waved, but he smiled if they smiled first. The grown-ups said he had been lighting the lantern for over 50 years. Maybe more. And always at the same place, at the same time. When asked why he did it, Tom would only say, "Some lights are not for us. But they still need someone to carry them." And that was all. Until one summer, when something changed. And the light in the forest did not stop at the edge. It kept coming. The night the light came closer, the wind was still. No dogs barked. No owls called. Even the fire in Tom's cottage burned lower than usual, as if listening. He sat on his log, as he always did. The lantern swung gently from the post, glowing with its usual warm light. But then, something moved beyond the trees. Not fast. Not loud. A flicker. Gold, like his lantern. But not the same. This one moved like it was looking for something. Or someone. Tom leaned forward and placed his hand on the log beside him. He did not speak. He did not rise. He simply watched. And the light, slow, steady, came through the trees. It was not a flame. Not a torch. Not fire. It was a glow, soft and round, like a drifting star. It floated a foot above the ground and moved without sound. Children watching from their windows rubbed their eyes. Mothers pulled their curtains shut, gently. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Respect. The light stopped at the post. Tom stood slowly and touched the top of his lantern. The flame inside dimmed until it was barely glowing. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat and took out a second lantern. smaller, older. He hadn't lit it in years. Its glass was cracked, and its handle worn smooth. He held it up to the floating glow. And the glow drifted inside. As if it belonged there. As if it had been waiting. Tom nodded. The wind picked up slightly, just enough to move the leaves. He whispered, "Welcome back." Then turned toward the village and walked. Not toward his home. Toward the hills. The children who had been watching followed quietly, bare feet on the road. No one told them not to. They felt no danger. Only wonder. The kind of wonder that holds your breath gently in your chest, like a song you've almost forgotten. When Tom reached the top of the hill, he placed the lantern on the grass. The golden glow inside it swirled once, then dimmed to a soft flicker. The children stood in a small circle behind him, wide-eyed and silent. One of them, a girl with long braids, stepped forward and asked, "Is it going to stay?" Tom looked down at the lantern and smiled. "Only until it remembers the way." The girl tilted her head. "The way to where?" Tom tapped the lantern gently. "Home." The morning after the lantern glowed on the hill, Elderwood woke quietly. The sky was soft with clouds, and the ground still smelled of night rain. The children who had followed Tom the evening before spoke of what they'd seen, in whispers only. Not out of fear. But because it felt like something sacred. And in Elderwood, sacred things were never shouted. Tom, as usual, was gone by sunrise. No one saw where he slept. Some believed he still had a bed in his cottage. Others thought he no longer needed sleep at all. But the lantern, the small, cracked one with the golden glow, remained on the hill. Still lit. Still warm. And beside it, a note had been pressed into the grass by a smooth river stone. The paper was old. The writing simple. It said, "Leave something kind." By noon, small gifts had begun to appear around the lantern. A wildflower. A feather. A polished button. A tiny bell. Nothing large. Nothing loud. Just small things. Good things. Things that felt like thank yous. And the light in the lantern began to grow brighter. Not much. Just enough. It pulsed gently when someone approached. Especially when the visitors came with open hearts and quiet hands. One child swore she heard it hum. Another said it made her dream of a place that smelled like warm bread and rain. By the end of the week, Tom came down from the forest again. He looked older. Not weaker, but filled with something heavy, like memory. He visited the lantern on the hill and sat beside it. The children followed, as they often did. One boy, small and serious, asked, "What is it?" Tom tapped the lantern once, gently, and said, "It's part of a story." "Whose story?" asked another. Tom smiled. "Yours." "Mine." "The forest's." All stories, if you listen long enough, begin with a light. That night, the sky cleared. Stars came out, more than usual. And the lantern on the hill pulsed like a heartbeat. Slow. Steady. Waiting. By the fourth evening, something strange and soft began to happen. The cobblestone paths in Elderwood, usually quiet and worn, started to hum underfoot, not loudly, and only at night. Just a soft vibration, like a cat's purr, if you were still enough to notice. People said the stones were remembering footsteps. Old ones. Steps that had passed long ago, and never truly left. A woman named Lisa, who ran the village bakery, was the first to speak of it. She said she had dreamed of her grandmother the night before. The woman had been gone for many years. But in the dream, she was kneading bread on the old wooden counter, and humming. When Lisa woke, the air in the bakery smelled faintly of cinnamon, though she hadn't used any that week. Other villagers had similar stories. An old man saw a toy he had lost as a child appear on his porch. A young couple heard music coming from their garden, though no instrument was near. Each story was gentle, quiet, and every one of them happened after someone had left something by the lantern. Tom said little. He spent more time in the forest now, sometimes not returning for days. But the lantern always stayed lit. And the light inside it no longer drifted like smoke, it spun. Slowly. Thoughtfully. Like it was listening to the village. And perhaps, choosing. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees, Tom returned. He walked to the lantern and stood beside it as the children gathered. He looked more tired than before. Not in body, but in spirit. The way old books sometimes look before their pages fall loose. He placed a small object beside the lantern. A ring. Simple. Bronze. Worn. He didn't explain. He only said, "Some memories ask to be carried." Then he turned and walked back into the trees. The next morning, the lantern was dimmer. Not dying. Just thoughtful. As if it had taken the ring into itself. As if it was remembering too. For many days, the lantern stayed quiet. It still glowed at night, steady and warm. But it no longer spun. It no longer pulsed. It simply waited. The people of Elderwood grew used to its presence. Children stopped leaving trinkets as often. The curious visitors from nearby towns came less frequently. And Tom had not returned for nearly a week. His cottage remained empty. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. His chair on the porch stayed dry, even after a rain. Some said he had gone deeper into the woods. Others believed he had followed the light wherever it had come from. But no one tried to find him. Not because they didn't care, but because they understood something now. Tom had never truly belonged to the village. He belonged to the edge of things. The space between forest and home. Then, one cloudy evening, the lantern changed again. Not suddenly. Not with sound. But with scent. A breeze passed through the village that night, soft and cold, like river water in autumn. And with it came the smell of pine, and ash, and something older. Earth. Stone. Roots. The lantern flickered once. And then, without warning, rose slowly into the air. Not high. Not fast. Just a gentle lift, like a leaf caught on a careful breeze. It floated from the hilltop toward the woods. No wind carried it. No string pulled it. It moved on its own, quiet and slow, down the old forest path. 3 children followed. No one told them to. They simply stood, looked at one another, and stepped into the trees. Their names were Mira, Dallin, and June. The youngest was 8. The oldest, 10. And though their hands trembled slightly, their steps were sure. The path under the trees was different now. Wider. Softer. And along the ground were tiny lights, not flames, but glows, like the lantern's reflection. They dotted the moss like fallen stars. The children said nothing. But as they walked, the trees leaned inward. Not in threat. But in welcome. Soon they reached a place where the roots of the trees curled up from the ground and wove together, forming a low arch. The lantern paused at the entrance. Then dimmed slightly. And waited. June reached out, gently, and touched the bark of the arch. It was warm. Not like sunlight, but like memory. She turned to the others and whispered, "I think this is the door." Mira nodded. "Then we go." The lantern passed under the arch. And the children followed. The arch of roots led to a clearing. But it was not like any place the children had seen before. The trees here stood taller, their bark pale and smooth, like driftwood washed in moonlight. The air was still, but full. Not heavy. Not cold. Just, full, the way a quiet room feels when someone is listening. The lantern hovered ahead of them, its golden glow dim but steady. It floated toward the center of the clearing, where a circle of stones lay half buried in moss. There were 12 of them. Round. Flat. Arranged like numbers on a clock. And in the center of the circle, nothing. Just soft earth and scattered petals. The lantern lowered gently, coming to rest just above the center. And there it stayed. Still. Waiting. Mira stepped forward first. She knelt at the edge of the circle and touched one of the stones. It was warm. And when her fingers brushed its surface, she heard something, not a sound, but a feeling. A memory that was not hers. A cradle rocking. A lullaby hummed by a voice long gone. A soft laugh in candlelight. Her breath caught. She pulled her hand away and looked at the others. "They're stories," she said. "They're people," said June. "They're watching," Dallin whispered. They sat down quietly, one child to a stone. There weren't 12 of them, only 3. But the remaining stones didn't seem empty. They only seemed patient. Like chairs waiting for old friends. Then the clearing changed. Not in shape. Not in sound. But in time. The light in the lantern began to spin again, faster this time, but still gentle. And the moss around the circle turned brighter. Tiny lights blinked into view among the leaves. Not fireflies. Not magic. Just memories that had chosen to be seen. A woman's laughter echoed once, as if from far away. Then faded. A boy's footsteps. A song hummed low. The whisper of a wooden spoon in a pot. And finally, Tom's voice. Clear. Kind. Tired. "This is the part you must listen for. This is the part where stories sleep, so they can be dreamed again." The lantern dimmed to a soft, golden pulse. The grove breathed in once, then out. And the children felt very, very still. Not frozen. Not trapped. Just, placed. Like books on a shelf. Safe. Remembered. That night, Elderwood was quieter than usual. Even the wind refused to blow. And in the deepest part of the forest, under a roof of stars and roots, 3 children sat in a ring of stone. And the forest listened. The children sat in the circle of stones for what felt like no time at all. But also, for hours. Time moved differently here. There was no sky, but there was light. There was no sun, but the grove glowed, soft and golden, as if the air itself remembered what warmth was. The lantern pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat at rest. And the longer the children sat, the quieter the world became. Until there were no birds. No wind. No breath. Only memory. Mira was the first to speak. But when she opened her mouth, it wasn't her own voice she heard. It was a voice from long ago. A child's voice. Gentle. Clear. "I remember when the woods were smaller. We built a swing in the branches. We played until dark." The words left her mouth like air from a long-held balloon, soft, simple, released. She blinked. June reached for her hand. "That wasn't you," she whispered. Mira shook her head. "No, but it felt like it could have been." Then June spoke. Her words came slower. Deeper. "I left a song in the moss," she said. "They never found it. But the trees did." She smiled, not frightened, not confused. Just quiet. Then Dallin leaned forward, placed both hands on the earth between the stones, and said. They were never lost. Just waiting to be remembered. The lantern flared once, a small spark of gold, like a sigh in the dark. And then it went out. Completely. No glow. No smoke. Just the sound of soft breathing from the forest itself. The children didn't move. They didn't need to. Because in the center of the ring where the lantern had floated, something new appeared. A shape made of light. Not a person. Not an animal. Just presence. A shape like a coat hung on memory. A glow with no center. And in the glow, a voice. Not loud. Not deep. But steady. Do you remember why he lit the lantern? The children didn't answer. They only listened. The voice continued. Not to guide the lost. Not to banish the dark. But to remind the forest, and the village, that someone still remembered. The glow dimmed. The voice softened. Now it's your turn. Keep the light, even when there is no flame. And then the shape faded. The circle of stones cooled. The moss grew quiet. And the children were alone again. But they were not afraid. Because they knew, now, that the lantern was never about light. It was about memory. When the children stood, the stones no longer felt warm. The moss was quiet again. The lantern was gone. And yet, they did not feel its absence. It was in them now. Soft, quiet, resting, like a lullaby at the edge of waking. They walked slowly back through the arch of roots. The forest did not move around them. The lights in the moss had faded. But the trees still leaned, just slightly. As if watching. As if saying. You may leave now. But you will always return. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the stars were high. The village below was still and sleeping. No torches burned. No windows flickered. But one lantern hung from the old post near the trees. It was not Tom's. It was new. Simple iron. Clean glass. Inside it burned a tiny flame. No one had lit it. It was just there. Waiting. June stepped toward it and placed her hand on the post. It's ours now, she said. Mira nodded. Dallin didn't speak, he only looked up at the stars. Somewhere above them, a night bird called once, then fell quiet. The children did not go home right away. They sat on the same log where Tom used to wait. They didn't say much. But they didn't need to. Because the silence felt full now, like a pause in a story, not its end. And when they did rise and walk back into the village, something subtle happened. The old stones beneath their feet hummed again. Just once. Like a welcome. Or a memory turning over in its sleep. The next morning, the people of Elderwood awoke to find a note tacked to the village square's notice board. It was written in careful, crooked script. No name. No signature. Just 5 simple words. The light is still carried. The village did not change overnight. But it changed. In quiet ways. In ways only the careful noticed. Children who had never spoken much now listened more. Elders who once sat alone at dusk now left candles by their doorsteps. And each evening, just as the sky turned silver, a single lantern was lit at the edge of the forest. No one said who lit it. But it was always there. And the post it hung from never weathered. Even in rain. Even in wind. June began walking the path toward the trees each morning. She never went far. Just to the edge, just enough to nod at the trunks and greet the stillness. Sometimes, she left small things behind. A folded leaf. A button. A note that said nothing but felt like something. Mira took to writing. She filled pages with stories she didn't remember thinking of. Tales of hidden streams and talking birds. Of sleeping giants and dancing stones. She never shared them aloud. But she placed them under the post beside the lantern, tucked neatly in a wooden box someone had left there years ago. And Dallin began carving. Wood, mostly. Sometimes stone. Not with skill, but with care. Small things. A smooth fox curled in sleep. A lantern the size of a coin. A little bench with 3 tiny figures, sitting side by side. He never signed them. But people found them all the same. And somehow, they always knew where they had come from. The people of Elderwood spoke less often of Tom. Not because they forgot him. But because forgetting was not the same as letting go. And the light he once carried no longer needed his hands. It had new ones now. And it burned just as warm. One autumn evening, a stranger came through the village. She wore a gray cloak and carried a walking stick shaped like a braid. She asked no questions. But when she reached the edge of the woods, she stopped at the post. She looked at the lantern. And she smiled. Then, without a word, she sat on the old log and waited. And as the stars blinked into the sky, and as the air cooled like breath, the flame in the lantern flickered once. Like it remembered her. The stranger stayed for 3 nights. She never gave her name. She never asked for food or water. She simply walked the paths, watched the sky, and sat near the lantern as dusk fell. Children watched her from windows. Elders nodded kindly as she passed. And though no one spoke to her, she smiled. Like someone who had found something she'd once lost. On the 3rd evening, just as the last bird flew low over the treetops, she stood beside the post. She touched the wood, gently, like greeting an old friend. Then she turned to the village behind her and whispered. "You've done well." He would be proud. She didn't say who. But they knew. She opened her hand. Inside it, a small stone, round and smooth, glowing faintly gold. She placed it beneath the lantern. And the flame within it flickered twice. Then grew still. Not out. Just, resting. Like it had finished something. The stranger turned toward the trees. Walked beneath the canopy. And disappeared. No sound. No path. Just leaves falling softly in her wake. That night, Elderwood felt different. Not colder. Not sad. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a song. After the last note fades, and your heart is full. The next morning, children found the stone at the base of the lantern. It no longer glowed. But when held, it felt warm, like hands that once held stories. June, Mira, and Dallin placed it inside the wooden box with the other things. They didn't speak. But they smiled. Years passed. Seasons turned. The lantern never failed. Even when no one lit it. Even when no one stood watch. It simply glowed. Because it was no longer just a light. It was a promise. That someone would remember. That someone would wait. That someone would carry the stories. And so, when the nights grew long, and the stars blinked a little slower, and the wind carried the smell of pine and earth and distant songs, people in Elderwood would say, "The lantern is watching. The light is listening. Sleep easy." Because in Elderwood, no story is ever truly forgotten. And no light ever truly goes out.